Okay, hi. We need to do this wrap up, and this is a wrap up unlike any wrap up I've had since starting BookTube, because I actually have just about as many DNFs and did not attempts as I have finished books. So February was a really, really hard month, between an insane amount of work. I mean, truly insane. And being knocked out by the vaccine booster that I got. I lost days of my life. Don't think I'm a wimp or anything. I had zero reaction to the first vaccine. I had Johnson & Johnson, or Janssen, or whatever they call it now. And then I had Pfizer for my booster. It nearly I didn't do anything for 2 days, and then it took me about a week to feel fully normal after that. So it was intense. So between that and insane amounts of work, for whatever reason, just really wanting to do nothing but sit in front of the TV and watch true crime documentaries on binge, I didn't get to all my reading, and I feel totally fine about that. Reading should be fun, and it should enhance moments in your life. I don't believe in TBR punishments or anything like that. Why on earth would I want to punish myself for taking care of myself and for attempting to do something that I really enjoy, and successfully doing something I really enjoy a lot? Punishing? No. So here we go. First, these are the 5 books that I did not get to. So first is A Precious Daughter, and I'm going to add that to April. Next is Howard's End. I'm going to add that to April. I'm going to add these next 2 to May. That's Hamnet and Judith and the Kingdoms. And then I'm going to add this one to July, The Magnolia Palace. I didn't get to them, and I really want to read them all, and I will, just didn't get to them. Now, these are books that I DNF. Water Dancer. I think that at a different time, I would really love this book. I don't want to DNF it forever, but I couldn't read it right now. I think I got about 100 pages into it, and decided it wasn't the time. Same with Dava Shastri's Last Day. I got pretty far into this and realized that I wasn't tracking with it. I wasn't remembering information that I needed to remember, and I had no real interest in it. However, I do think that I would really enjoy this, given a different headspace. So I would like to come back to that at some point, so I will refilter that back into my TBR shelves. And the same for Moonglow. This was not the book that I thought it was going to be, and that's on me. I often go into books having read very little about them, if anything at all, and I thought this was something completely different from what it actually is. I'm super interested in what it is, but I wasn't in the right headspace for it, so I will refilter this back into my TBR shelf and pull it out at a later date. Then I have 2 books that I DNF'd for. One is Saphira and the Slave Girl, which makes me really sad because this cover is so beautiful. But I had reservations about it going into it, and I believe it is intended to be addressing racism, but at the same time, it is also quite a racist book. It is from its era, the early 1900s. It's set, I think, in the late 1800s. Again, I do believe Willa Cather is quite thinking ahead for her time period. And I do believe that Willa Cather would have considered herself to not be a racist. And I honor that. And I support that belief. However, this book, although kind of like Uncle Tom's Cabin, although it is an anti-racist book, it is also inherently racist. And I just wasn't up for it. Like, I've read this before. Not this particular story, but I've read this before. And I'm done reading that. I know that it's there. I don't need to keep confirming that for myself. So I'm passing this on. And then American Royals by Katharine McGee, DNF forever. Then I had some books sneak on to my TBR that I had not planned on. So originally I'd planned on Nita Prose's The Maid as being my choice for book club, for my in real life book club. But in the end, I gave my book club several choices to choose from, and they didn't pick that one. They picked one that I hadn't put on my TBR. And so that was All the Lonely People, and that ended up being added to my February TBR, and I absolutely love this, and you'll hear more about it in a moment. So that snuck onto my TBR unexpectedly. And then this came in for me as a library hold, an audio library hold, and I started listening to it, and I was loving it so much that I ordered myself a copy, bought myself a copy. And then I've got my trusty old Kindle here because I got an ARC for one of my most anticipated reads. I got several ARCs for several most anticipated reads from NetGalley, which is, I mean, usually I don't get things that I really want from NetGalley. Not the case in February. And that is The Birdcage by Eve Chase. Now, Eve Chase wrote one of my favorite mystery thrillers of all time, and that is Black Rabbit Hall. She also wrote The Wilding Girls, which I think is published in other countries as The Daughters of Foxcote Manor, but here it was published as The Wildling Girls. And I did not enjoy that one at all. In fact, I still haven't finished it. I've started it multiple times. I still haven't finished it. I just can't get into it. But I loved Black Rabbit Hall. I've read it several times, a thriller, and I've read it several times. That tells you something, right? And so when I found out that she finally had her third book coming out, it was called Birdcage. It was again about family secrets and a group of sisters. These are all things that she's always writing about. Was hopeful. I was very hopeful. My heart leaned towards it's going to be like Black Rabbit Hall and not like Wildling Sisters, and I was right. I'm so happy that I've pre-ordered this book. I'm so happy that I got to read it. Let's talk about the two nonfiction books that I read. Enough Already by Valerie Bertinelli. I will not be pulling a teacup question about this one because it is nonfiction, and all my teacup questions are fiction-based questions. But this is a memoir. I listened to her on the audio that I got from my library, and I read along in this as she spoke. It's like any memoir she's written. It is very food-centered, very community-centered, very family-centered. There's lots of memories in here. It felt a little sadder than some of her previous work, maybe a little less hopeful, but I say that hesitantly because I also think she's in a really good place in her life, but she just seemed a little bit more melancholy, I would say, is a good word. So I gave this 4 stars, not because she's sad, but because it was lacking just a little luster of some sort. And then, of course, the one that snuck onto my TBR is Lost in the Valley of Death, a story of obsession and danger in the Himalayas. Now, this book was amazing because this man who disappears, Justin Alexander Shetler, there's a picture of him. He and I have crossed paths all across the world. I don't know him. And I kept reading thinking, like, this is how much we've crossed paths. I was like, at some point, this author is gonna talk about some human that we have in contact, like some human we have in common. And he never did. This man, Justin, has just shy, like just right after me, he's lived in the cities, sometimes on the streets that I have lived. It was so weird to read about a person who's been all the places that I have been in the order that I have been to them. It was very bizarre. We never met. I don't know him. I know a lot of people like him, but I don't know him. But his story was one of, his story is unique. All our stories are unique, but it's also, he's kind of an archetype for a lot of the people that I met during my many years of living in northern India. And so reading his story, it was his story, but it was also the potential story of a lot of people that I know and love. And so it was an incredibly uniquely impactful and engaging and terrifying book for me. I don't know if it would be the same kind of experience reading it for people who aren't as close to it as I am. I think that it was really good writing. It's very well researched. It's a compelling true crime story. And so, I mean, I think that there's a lot there to interest people, but for me, this was a very different kind of reading experience. I'm really happy that I found this book. I don't think I can rate it objectively because it was such a subjective experience for me to encounter that book. All of that out of the way, it is time now for some teacup questions. So if you weren't here last month when I introduced the teacup question wrap up, let me just very quickly tell you that I have many questions in here. I didn't read most of them. I don't know exactly what is on the questions. I definitely don't know what question I'm going to pull for what book. And for the most part, I really don't even know what the questions are. Like, I purposefully didn't read them. I just went through, grabbed some lists of analysis questions from different websites online and printed them out, cut them into little strips, and put them in my teacup. So they are a complete surprise to me. How will I respond to them? I do not know. None of this is pre-planned. None of this is pre-structured. And I think that it went really well for the first time last month. And let's try it again for a second time. So here we go. The Virgin's Lover by Philippa Gregory. So let's see what it is. The question is, if this book were a different book, what book would it be? Explain. That is such a hard question. Let me think for a second. Okay, this book is historical fiction that's very well researched about Queen Elizabeth and Lord Dudley and their affair, their presumed affair. But it is more so the story. Although most of the content is about them, ultimately it is the story of Robert Dudley's wife and how she is killed. So I think that if this book were a different book, it would be, instead of historical fiction, it would be true crime, cold case, documentary style. And Dudley and Elizabeth would be much more clearly suspects in a case. We have Meg Cabot, Royal Wedding. Let's see here. Ooh. 3 works of art that you associate with this book. Explain. Okay, I don't know who these artists are, but one immediately popped into my head, which is very interesting. So I will put images up here for you to see. So 3 works of art that I associate with Meg Cabot, Royal Wedding. This is the story, I think it's the last book in the Princess Diaries series. And this is where Mia, spoilers here, this is where Mia gets to marry Michael Moskowitz, finally, after 13 books or something. When this came out in 2015, I got it because I was moving and I wanted something lighthearted to read, and I knew that I really got a kick out of Princess Diaries. Wanted the completion, but it took me till 2022 to actually read it. And it let me down a little bit. I think it's just where I'm at. I don't think the book has changed at all. I think I have changed an awful lot. But the 3 images that kind of pop into my head when I think of artwork to associate with this book are this one of the woman blowing the bubble gum. Also, I think just because she's a royal, but another picture that popped into my mind was this one of Marie Antoinette. And then for whatever reason, this image of roller skates popped into my mind. I don't know why, but it, for whatever reason, is an image that I have, for whatever reason, associated. I think maybe it's just like that youthful feeling. The Arctic Fury by Greer Macallister is my next book. Oh, okay. So that is summarize the book using only 5 words. Women disappear to find man. Next, we have a House in the Country by Ruth Adam. Cast the movie adaptation of this book. So the movie adaptation of A House in the Country by Ruth Adam would have a gigantic cast of characters. It would be such a big cast. So I'm just going to cast a couple of people. So Ruth Adams herself is a character in this. The basic premise of this is that it is based on real events, but it is fictionalized. At the end of World War II, after having lived in London throughout the war, a group of friends thrown together by the war who don't really seem to like each other very much decide to actually take action on a dream that they had talked with each other about during the war years. And that was to move to the country, to buy a manor house, to live together kind of as a commune, shared living space in a very large old manor house. Well, one comes on the market and they can scrape all their money together and they can't afford it. The motive for Ruth and her husband wanting to do this is really to give her children the opportunity to have free open spaces, clean air, and lots of good, healthy farm-grown food. The other people all have their own, people in the group of friends all have their own reasons for wanting to do this, but Ruth really is pushing this because of her children. So they do find a house, they do purchase it. I think that I would cast as Ruth Sandra Bullock, but she'd have to have a British accent. Then there is a gruff, traditionalist kind of butler character who comes with the house. He and his wife come with the house. I would cast him, and I would cast Sir Anthony Hopkins as him, not because Anthony Hopkins has played butlers previously, he has, but I just kept envisioning this character as a middle of his career Anthony Hopkins with a little more muscles. Cracking myself up over here. All right. If you could hear this same story from another's point of view, who would you choose? All right. So this is the story of sisters who have some difficulty with each other because the family moves from one place where they're well established to another place where they're not well established in Massachusetts to be closer to the older sister's, her gymnastics stuff. The other sister, kind of over the top in the writing here for me, but she gets emotionally neglected out of necessity, really, because the family's just so busy, and she feels, we're hearing it from her perspective, and so we see how she feels neglected and mistreated and ignored and kind of like a second-class citizen in the family. She's not as important as her sister. I think that there's other things going on in this book as well, as you can probably guess from the cover. But I think that I would have really liked to hear this from the perspective of, don't be shocked, one of the dead girls. So the sister who feels neglected finds in the library a book which is kind of writing itself as she reads it. It's a magical book. It's telling the story of two sisters, one of whom disappeared and the other didn't. I would like to have heard it from the story of the sister that disappeared. I think that would have been a very interesting perspective to have. There's a lot going on in this book. This is a middle grade book. It has some pretty adult themes at times. So if you, I still would recommend it to a middle schooler, but I would also recommend pairing it with some conversation. It was also extremely creepy at moments. I find a lot of the time that middle grade books scare me more than adult horror. The Body in the Library, Agatha Christie. I'm gonna pick from this side. 3 songs I associate with this book and why. 3 songs I associate with this book and why. The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. Okay, so this was a super enjoyable read. I was laughing out loud. The character of Mrs. Bantry was so hilarious to me. She had so many ridiculous statements to make. I really loved this entire story. The Bantrys wake up one morning and they find that there is a dead girl in their library. They don't know who she is. They don't know how she got there. They don't know how she died. Of course, they call the police. The house calls the police. Their staff call the police. A detective comes. But Mrs. Bantry calls Miss Marple. And of course, Miss Marple is the one who is able to solve the crime. Crime is, I'm always really surprised by how gruesome Agatha Christie is. Her setup of who commits this crime and why is so contemporary. It's so contemporary and it freaks me out. Let's see. I think that 3 songs, and I'll put up an image to go with them. I don't know what the image will be, but I'll put up an image. So I've got, I can't pin it down, but in my mind, I've got, what's that? That's, hey, that's my baby. No, sir, don't mean maybe. That's my baby. That song, I'll look it up. But I've got that one going through my mind from the 20s or 30s or 40s, somewhere in there. And then also, for whatever reason, really strong in my mind right now, I've got Thriller by Michael Jackson. Because this is Thriller. So that's going through my mind. I think it's just because of the word library. It fits. I don't want to tell you how it fits because it would really, my reasoning for how it fits would really reveal something too much about the mystery. Telling you the title of the song won't reveal anything. Love in the Library by, what's his face? Margaritaville guy. That was hard and fun. Troilus and Cressida. Wow, I was very dominant with how far I stuck my tabs out on this one. So Troilus and Cressida, I read this with my group that is reading the comedies. If you know it, you're probably like, that's a comedy. But it's listed among the problem plays, as in we can't really categorize it. And so sometimes it gets listed as comedy and sometimes it doesn't. And it was listed as a comedy on the list that our fearless leader guiding us from. So we read this one. I'm going to go ahead and pull 3 people, real or imaginary, that you associate with this book. Explain. All right. It's called Troilus and Cressida. Can I associate Troilus and Cressida with it? No, I'll try not to do that. Homer. I associate Homer, not Homer Simpson, Homer, the epic poet who may or may not have been a singular human being, because this actually is a retelling of the Trojan War. So Homer would be my first person. And then for whatever reason, maybe because he was in Gladiator, I associate that actor with this. What's his name? Russell Crowe. I associate Russell Crowe with this for whatever reason. Maybe because he was in Gladiator. This does not take place during Gladiator times. It is not about Romans. But I have that in my head, so I'm going with it. We're all about the transparent honesty here. So I've got Russell Crowe, I've got Homer, and Shakespeare. He wrote it, so how could I not? So he's in my mind too. This is a retelling of the Trojan War, but it focuses on Troilus and Cressida, who are both from Troy. They have liked each other from afar and they haven't told each other. And then her uncle, who's a super creepy guy. I'm talking like Predator here, but he's super creepy. But he orchestrates their meeting and they spend a night together and declare their love for each other. And then the next morning she wakes up to be told that she is being traded for a prisoner because of who her father is. And I won't go into all that, but she's being traded to the Greeks for a prisoner, for a Trojan prisoner. She promises Troilus that she will be true to him, even though, obviously there's reasons why she, a young girl, is being traded to the Greeks, right? And Troilus sneaks into the camp and overhears a conversation that she has with her Greek owner, her Greek captor, who she is now enslaved to, and realizes that she's not been true to him. But the question is, is it possible for her to have been true to him in those circumstances? But he freaks out. Right, of course. So in a lot of ways, this is a tragedy. Tons of time is spent not on Troilus and Cressida. The majority of this play is spent on woo-woo kind of fight talk between the soldiers, about the soldiers, and there is a battle. And there are whole other characters who you would recognize from Greek mythology who are in this. We're talking Achilles, etc. The thing about it is, what is really interesting to me about this play is that None of them are gods. They're not gods. They're completely and utterly human. And so their story, they take the same actions, but there's nothing of the universal and the eternal about them that brings justification to their actions. As humans, the things that they do don't make sense. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So although I do not think this is one of the greatest plays, and it does feel incomplete, like maybe it should have been the first in a series of plays, it's fascinating. So I do actually recommend this play, even though it's not the greatest play. It is a real thought-provoking play. Binti. Again, I put them so far out. Binti. So here we go. Who is the protagonist of this novel? Identify her quickly by name. It says him, her, but identify her quickly by name, age, era, locale, social class, family, and occupation. That is a super interesting question for this book. Binti is the main character. She is college age. This is set in the future. She is initially living in what we would think of as Africa, but she then boards an airship to travel to another planet where she will be able to attend college, university. But the majority of the book takes place on this airship. She is, I don't know how to register social class. She is from a planet and a culture on that planet that is not highly regarded by another culture on that planet because her culture is very in touch with nature. They're very naturalist. They hold a lot of history and they're very kind of spiritual, supernatural oriented. The culture that kind of disregards them because of that is very technologically advanced and clean. She's very clean too. What you see here is her covering herself in a special kind of clay from the earth that they make. And that's one of the things that is a thing of modesty and beauty in her culture, and grounding, like physical grounding in her culture. But the more predominant culture is disdainful of that because she's covered in dirt in their eyes, right? She is one, if not the only, she's one of, or maybe the only person from her culture that gets invited to go to this university. And that's partly because they don't usually apply. Because it's just not part of their goal system, I guess. It's not something that's on their radar that they want to do, although they are educated. She is very high up in her own culture, though, very respected in her own culture because of who her family is, but outside of that, she's looked down upon. Then she ends up on the airship where something happens and another being, not just another culture, but another being takes over. And I don't want to tell you any more about that or where she stands in that dynamic. I don't like sci-fi. I loved this, and I will be reading the rest of the trilogy. Claire of the Sea Light. Who would you befriend, fall in love with, or slap? Okay, Claire of the Sea Light. So this was one of the ALA books that I read, recommended by the American Library Association. It would not have ever been on my radar. I'd never heard of this author, and I knew nothing about this book or its existence, but it was such a great read, and I would like to read more by this author. Nuts and bolts. It is the story of, so it starts with a tsunami in Haiti. And a single father who needs to make hard decisions. And so he is going to leave his daughter, literally, legally give his daughter to the dressmaker in the village. And he knows her, and at first when you're reading it, you're like, is this going to be a safe place for her? But it is going to be a safe place for her. We learn all the backstory of all the people in this village who are connected in any way, shape, or form to this young girl. She disappears. So the night that they're supposed to do this, that she's supposed to go to live with this woman and her father is going to leave so that he can earn money and do other things that he needs to do. She just disappears. She goes into the tent or the hut that they live in to retrieve her things. And she's taking a really long time. And when he goes to retrieve her, thinking that she's just having a nostalgia moment or whatever, she's not there. The remainder of the book is not necessarily about finding out where she went or what happened to her. It's how they got to this point in the first place. And so it's a lot of related stories. They're not short stories. It definitely reads like a continuous novel, but you're not progressing with that event, that first opening event, the way that you normally would in a chronological narrative. It's fascinating, really, the way that this story is told. And in the end, you have knowledge in the end. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and I highly recommend it. It will be one that I recommend to people all the time. So the question was, who would I befriend, fall in love with, or slap? I would befriend, I'm going to forget all of their names. We never know his name. I would befriend the father in this. I would, fall in love with, befriend, fall in love with, and slap. I would befriend the father. There's a 19-year-old boy in here. I won't tell you what his name is because I don't want to ruin the story, but there's a 19-year-old boy in here who I would slap. And who would I want to fall in love with? There's not really a character in here that I would want to fall in love with. Maybe platonic love. Maybe I'd want to fall into platonic love with the dressmaker. She is a formidable character who's suffered a lot of loss and yet hasn't shut down. I mean, she has moments. It's like she has to work through her stuff. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, she's still a very open, inviting, loving woman. All right. Is there a destination in the book, real or fantasy, that you would love to visit? So the book takes place, if you don't know, the book takes place in Russia. And I would love to visit Russia. I've never been to Russia. My sister has been to Russia. I would love to visit Russia. I would love, I think, especially to visit the countryside. I'm going to do a whole video about my experience with War and Peace. Didn't love it. I'm going to do a whole video about my experience with this book, and I'll tell you more then. But would I like to go to Russia? Absolutely, I'd like to go to Russia. The Screen in Pleasant Land by Isha Malik. Ooh, this is two questions. Oh no, it's this one. Okay, here we go. What artist would you choose to illustrate this book? What kinds of illustrations would you include? So this is the story of Bilal Hasham, whose mother, on her deathbed, makes him promise to fulfill his promise to build a mosque in their small UK village. And he attends Christian church on occasion because it's a village activity, right? And he's very much involved in village life. He's like on the village council and all sorts of things. He is a Muslim man, and I believe they're from Pakistan. I'm not entirely solid on that knowledge, but I believe they're from Pakistan. He and his extended family have lived in England for quite some time. On her deathbed, she makes him promise to build this mosque finally. And of course, he doesn't intend to do that. He promises, but he doesn't intend to do that because that would really disrupt his life in a lot of ways. And it would disrupt his entire village in a lot of ways. However, the longer he goes through the grieving process, the more realizations he starts to have. There's also a lot of realizations that happen with the Christian minister and the people in the village association and council, between him and his wife, between her and her ex, between their children and them. It's a really amazing book about family, community, and faith. And I loved it. I thought it was just really beautiful. The question is, who would I have illustrate this? I need to think about that for a minute. Tan. I don't remember his first name, but he is a graphic novelist, and he did The Arrival. I'll put a picture up here. I don't remember his first name. His last name is Tan, though. And I would like him to illustrate it, not necessarily in a graphic novel style, but with, you know how in Dickens, like they just implant, or in Alice in Wonderland, they just implant in the middle of the text an image that supports what's happening in that moment. I would do it that way. I would just implant in the middle of the text an image that's happening that way. The Maid by Nita Prose. Whew, if you could be part of this book, which character would you like to be? So this is a murder mystery that takes place in a hotel. It is contemporary. There is a woman who is neurodiverse, and she has lived with her grandmother most of her life, and her grandmother has passed away due to cancer very recently. So she needs and craves and excels when she has order and a schedule, a clear schedule. And so she just continues to work throughout her grieving process. One day, while she's still in the grieving process, she shows up for work to clean a hotel room from a VIP, a big spender, an important person who often stays there with his, I believe, second or third wife. She shows up to clean that room as is normal for her and finds him dead. And that just kind of throws a wrench in all of her order and schedule and neatness. She's also, because she is neurodiverse, she also interacts with the world in a very different kind of way than is the expectation. And so she's considered a possible suspect. It's just a very interesting take on how society underestimates people. Who would I want to be in this book? Well, everybody in this book experiences some rough stuff. And yet it is ultimately a very endearing book. There are times where the situation is dire, and there are moments when really hard things happen. And yet, ultimately, always, I felt safe and good going into this book. Who would I want to be in this book? I'm talking around that question because I don't want to be anybody in this book. I guess who I would want to be in this book is no. You know who I want to be in this book? Hang on. You're not. Ooh, the sun has really come out. Charlotte. She is wow, that sun is crazy. I'm blinded. I'm going to keep going though. Charlotte is the one I'd want to be from this book. She is the defense attorney. That's who I would want to be. All right. All the lonely people. Keep picking these really short ones. Did you smell the book before you started reading it? I have no idea. I don't know if I smelled the book before I started reading it. Smell it now. I don't know. I can't answer that question. Did I smell this book before I started reading it? No, I don't think I did. This is All the Lonely People by Mike Gale. This ended up being my In Real Life book club book. We are meeting next week to talk about it on the 1st of March. But I loved this book. I absolutely and completely loved this book. It is the story of Hubert Bird, who immigrated to the UK from Jamaica when he was a young man looking for a better life and a means of supporting his family. And he gets that. He also falls in love. He has children. He establishes a life for himself. He has good friendships. A series of heartbreaking things happen for Hubert. And the story is told in then and now chapters. So you see him as he is now, kind of retreated from society, grumpy old man kind of character who lives for calls from his daughter, who lives in Australia. And you see that, and then you kind of get the backstory in these then chapters. His whole world starts to change when there is a knock on the door, and he has a new neighbor she's a single mom with a daughter, and she needs his help. And that really causes him to start to take steps out into his community. It's a heartbreaking, devastating, infuriating, and ultimately uplifting and feel-good book. I really loved it. I really, really loved it. I loved the writing. I loved the story. I loved the then and now unfolding of chapters. It takes some kind of weird turns on occasion. Things are not necessarily what you think they are, ever. But ultimately, it's such a great book. I really loved it. Really loved it. Did I smell it? I don't think so. Anne of Green Gables, which you would have seen last month because I'm reading it every month this year. All right. Were there any particularly cringe-worthy moments in this book? Oh, Anne. Yes, of course. Of course there are cringeworthy moments in Anne of Green Gables. If you've never read this book, you need to read this book. You will love this book. Everybody loves this book. I don't know a single person who has read it and hasn't loved it. If you're one of them, go ahead and introduce yourself down in the comments, because I'd love to meet somebody and just find out how or why you don't love it. Everybody loves this book. Anne of Green Gables, cringeworthy moments. Absolutely, 100% there are cringeworthy moments. I mean, Anne is constantly messing up, but it always works out in her favor. I think my favorite cringeworthy moment is when she forgets to put the cover on the custard and the mouse dies in it, and she almost serves it to the teacher at dinner, but then she can't, and so she tells the truth. But there are many, many cringeworthy moments. That's one of my favorites. Nope, second to last. Oh. This is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, but I specifically reread this in the annotated version. I received it as a birthday gift many a year ago and had never actually read all the annotations, etc. So I went ahead and did that this month. All right. Was there a point when you were confused about what was happening or why it was happening? All right. So I've read this book so many times, and I've seen every movie adaptation, and I've written papers about it, multiple papers about it, and I've thought about it an awful lot. There are definitely still things that are confusing and unclear, purposefully so. Like, where does Heathcliff go? Or I think I have more questions for Emily Bronte herself. There are more things that are confusing about the choices that Emily Bronte made in the writing of this story than there are confusing things in the book itself. Like, why can't they just communicate to each other? Why do those birds have to die? Did she intentionally give Kathy an eating disorder? Or is that something we just read into it? Lots of things, of course, lots of things. But I know this book so well that the story itself, I think at this point I have created bridges across most of the disconcerting or confusing things for myself. I have struggled with reasoning and come to conclusions. So no, I mean, yes, if you're reading this for the first time, yes, absolutely. But I don't think I really remember most of the things that were confusing to me the first time. The relationships, the family trees, that can definitely get confusing. All of the doubling, the naming of the people, which is totally intentional and needed for the telling of the story as it is, but that can be confusing. It doesn't confuse me at this point because, like I said, I've read it so many times at this point. If you've never read Wuthering Heights, I recommend it. Last one, and it's going to be for The Birdcage by Eve Chase. Put a picture of that right here. All right. So the question is, who is the one person you would like to gift this book and why? So who would I give The Birdcage to as a gift and why? So The Birdcage is a psychological thriller by Eve Chase, and it is about three sisters who share the same father but three different mothers, who reunite one summer, or who reunite every summer, but who are called one winter to the summer house where they used to reunite as children because they all lived with their respective mothers, and so they would spend the summers with their father, who was an artist and kind of a bohemian. They would regather at this beach house every summer in England, and they're called back one winter by the father because he is going to sell the house. He needs money because he's going to remarry. They find out that he's going to remarry someone from their communal past, and this is a problem for them. There is a huge mystery happening, at least one huge mystery happening, and the whole book is unfolding that for you, and it can feel a little bit frustrating at times because so many things are said to you as if you already know the context, but you have no idea what those things mean. It's like entering a conversation, or it's like listening It's like listening to an inside conversation between two best friends, and you weren't there for any of the things they're talking about. That's what it feels like for most of the book. It's very effective, and I enjoyed it, but also it can be frustrating. And then of course, there's a huge reveal in the end, and it's a great, twisty, turny, weird, creepy, wonderful book. Who would I gift it to? I would gift it to my friend Kristen, because Kristen and I read the first book by this author, Black Rabbit Hall, at a earlier date, and we read it around the same time. Kristen and I went to college together. We do not live in the same state, and we haven't seen each other in years, but we are good friends. And one of the things we have in common is a love of Eve Chase, and I think she would really love to get this book as a gift. In fact, when I got the ARC, she was the first person I told that I got the ARC, and I know that she loves Eve Chase. So that's who I would give this book to as a gift. I would also recommend that you pick it up when it is released. I believe it is being released in the summertime. So if you, in the meantime, if you haven't read Black Rabbit Hall by this author, you should definitely pick that one up if you're a thriller lover. And that is that for February. February is a wrap. My dog is definitely done with me being on the floor talking to you for so long about books and little strips of paper that he doesn't like. Hi, baby. Hi. He's so done. And the next time I post a video, it will be a wrap-up of War and Peace, which, spoiler, I did not like. Bye for now. Happy reading.